Hello, this is Joe Trahan, welcoming you to the All Me podcast from the Taylor Hooten Foundation, whose mission is to enlighten the world to the truths about appearance and performance-enhancing substances. As the national leader on this subject, they communicate their educational messages through various methods, including this podcast. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
Hi, and welcome to the All Me podcast. My name is Tavis Piatoli, Sports Dietitian for the Taylor Hooten Foundation, and today I'm going to be your host. Have you ever tried a diet, whether it was for weight loss, a medical reason, or performance? Each year, nearly 45 million Americans try a particular type of diet to lose weight. They also spend roughly $33 billion on weight loss products. The alarming part is 92% usually give up in the first week because they weren't perfect, and for those that do have success, 65% gain all of their weight back within 3 years. Why is it so difficult to have sustainability when dieting? In this podcast, we speak with sports dietitian Amy Goodson to discuss 4 of the most popular diet types in the US. We'll discuss the pros, cons, and science behind the ketogenic diet, intermittent fasting, plant-based diets, and the carnivore diet. We will also dive into the impact these type of diets could have on performance in athletes. Amy is a registered dietitian and certified specialist in sports dietetics. She has worked with the Dallas Cowboys, Texas Rangers, TCU Athletics, Ben Hogan Sports Medicine, FC Dallas Soccer, the NBA G League, the Alliance of the American Football League, many PGA Tour players, as well as thousands of middle, high school, and endurance athletes. She's the creator of a free sports nutrition program for Texas high schools, the Sports Nutrition Game Plan, and is the author of the Sports Nutrition Playbook, a play-by-play on sports nutrition for athletes, parents, coaches, and trainers. She's the co-author of Swim, Bike, Run, Eat, and Nutrition contributor to retired NFL player Donald Driver's book, The 3D Body Revolution. With a bachelor's degree in communications and a master's degree in exercise and sports nutrition, Amy is passionate about marrying the two to provide quality, science-based nutrition information through speaking, media, writing, and consulting. Amy has over 1,400 media placements in a variety of TV, radio, and print outlets, and is on the medical expert board for Eat This, Not That. We'd like to thank our partners at Gatorade for sponsoring this podcast. Amy, welcome to the All Me podcast. It's so good to see you, my friend.
Thank you for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
This is going to be a fun podcast, but a really cool topic in the fact that we're going to be talking about popular diets for athletes. Before we get into that and really talk about those types of diets and what things that you see in your practice and in your career, we really want to at least start with learning a little bit more about your career path. So tell our listeners a little bit about your career path and why did you get into the field of sports nutrition?
So I got into sports nutrition through fitness. I was a lover of all things, group exercise when we called it aerobics. I was a personal trainer, always had a real interest. I was a dancer growing up, always had a real interest in the fitness world. My original degree is actually in communications, and I had a minor in exercise physiology for no good reason, but I liked it. Senior year in college, decided I kind of like nutrition. And so better that I didn't know what I was getting myself into, and ended up just graduating with my communications degree and then becoming a registered dietitian, doing my master's in exercise and sports nutrition, internship, all the things. And so, I like to joke that I've worked Pee-wee to pro in regards to sports nutrition. I feel very fortunate and blessed to have had so many different opportunities. I worked for a sports medicine facility for almost 11 years. That was a part of a major hospital system. We did tons of work in the middle school and high school space. So I was always out at schools, talking to coaches, athletic trainers, all the, kids, lots of talks, sweating in the dirt at baseball practice and sweating in the weight room, standing on a weight room bench, talking to 8th graders. No one sees you then, but, and then have worked for TCU Athletics for 10 and a half years, spent 6 years consulting for the Texas Rangers, Major League Baseball, and other minor league teams, Dallas Cowboys for 4.5 years. And then, I've touched a lot of spaces, professional soccer, professional hockey, NBA G League, PGA Tour, actually first professional athletes to ever work with, lots of triathlete, marathon, everyday exerciser. So I feel really fortunate because, anytime you can see sports nutrition at the high school level and the college level and the professional level, you kind of start to see like the differences, the gaps, where a younger athlete needs to go, what the challenges are going to be, what the positives are. And so I've really felt fortunate to be able to see that across the board and then apply what I've learned and be able to not only coach athletes and help athletes, but also coach professionals and help dietitians and students that would like to travel down that path.
Yeah, I know towards the end of this, I want to learn a little bit more about a mastermind program that you've created. We'll talk about that. We'll provide that in the show notes. So anyone listening that is wanting coaching from a nutrition expert like yourself to really walk them through an entire path about how to build their career, I'm going to highly recommend taking Amy's courses. So we'll get into that as we get into the end. Now, let's dive into this topic today. We're going to talk about popular diets for athletes. And one of the things we see is just diets have so many labels, right? It's like everybody wants to put a label and name something. And my first kind of question around this is, why do you feel there's so many different labels or types of diets for these days? Not even just for athletes, but for individuals in general.
I think information is so accessible. So, now with social media, I mean, it used to be you had to like go buy a magazine to like read about something, but with the internet and social media and everyone eats. And so everyone talks about what they eat or they don't eat or whatnot. And so I really think it's just the bulk of information that we have available. And I always kind of like to joke that people are well informed with misinformation because they're just watching their favorite celebrity or their favorite athlete or whatnot. And people don't do the deep dive to learn about, is that actually good? Would that be something that's good for me? Just because it's popular or just because it works doesn't mean it's good for you. And I think that it's just a huge area in regards to look better, look bigger, get faster, get stronger, get leaner, get prettier, like whatever it is. And athletes, just like any other person, fall prey to that because they're trying to get to the next best thing.
Yeah, I get frustrated because I'm like, wow, there's another diet or here's another name. And like you said, it's a confusing thing because so many people don't know what to do. And I know we're going to kind of get into some of these really popular ones in just a second. And since our topic is popular diets, really with athletes or just in general, what are some of the common trends that you're seeing in the work you do with athletes and individuals?
Many of them get caught up. They're caught up with how they get, like I said, better, bigger, stronger, faster, leaner, lighter, whatever they want to get. And so I think that they're looking for a quick answer because they want to get there faster. You work long enough in pro sports and they know that every year they're looking for a faster, leaner, younger version of whoever you are. And sports are really competitive. And if you play and if you succeed is often based on, what you look like, what your numbers are you fast enough, et cetera. And so I think most athletes are looking on how to it's not even bad intentions, it's how to get there faster. And they assume that if it's working for other people or that it worked for their favorite athlete, that it will work for them without necessarily always looking at the consequences. They take things at face value without really doing the research or even doing a little more looking into the diet and looking at necessarily what could cause problems or what negative consequences could. Like any person looking at any diet, no one tends to look at the negative potential. They only look at the positive potential and they roll with that and start making eating and habit behavior changes based on the positive without weighing out the negatives.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of influencers in the world of diet or food or nutrition or fitness, it's like if they look a certain way and someone sees them and they make a claim, I'm doing this, people instantly think, I need to do that because I'm going to look like that. Right? And I was guilty of that. Like you mentioned earlier, we used to look at magazines. I used to look at Muscle and Fitness when I was in college or even even when I played high school football. And I'm like, I want to look like that guy or this and that. And I'm like, I had no idea that at the time they were using performance enhancing drugs and it's going to take more than 6 weeks to look like that.
Yeah, exactly. And, one of the things I like to remind athletes specifically is that just because they look a certain way doesn't mean they would play a certain way. If I asked a Victoria's Secret model off a TV, run, shoot or whatever to go run a few miles, probably couldn't. Just like if I asked a guy who just came out of a bodybuilding competition to go to the weight room, they couldn't. They might look a certain way, but that doesn't mean that their performance lines up with what they look like.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great point. So the first diet I want to dive into today, I think it's got a lot of hype and a lot of people do this diet. I see it a lot on social media, and it's the ketogenic diet. So we're going to talk about that first. And the first question I have around the ketogenic diet is, can you just give our listeners a little overview about what this diet is and really what defines a diet as keto?
So a keto diet is really designed as a high fat diet. Many people misconception kind of think it's high protein and high fat. It's really not, it's high fat. So the keto diet is designed to be around 60, 70% fat, 25-ish, maybe 25, 30% protein, and 5 to 10% carbs, with most of those just coming from vegetables. So it's a very high fat diet. Its origin was really designed to help children that had seizures and to stop seizures by starving the body of carbohydrate. And then I think people realize that you also, you don't eat carbohydrate for a while, you don't store the water content with it, you lose weight. They realize that these diets make them feel pretty full, et cetera. And so it's, the challenge to me is that a lot of people go on it, not necessarily thinking, again, like we said, like of the consequences, and not really paying attention to what is the quality of this diet that I'm eating, of the fat, of the protein, et cetera.
Do you get a lot of questions about this from athletes or just adults? Like, is this a common, like, hey, what do you think about this or the ketogenic diet?
It is common, whether they're calling it, for a long time, it was like really asking about the keto diet. Now I think you will also hear like the reverse side, which is the same, like they want to be on a low carb diet. So whether it's high fat, high protein, like I think the keto itself diet is still really popular, but a lot of times people will refer to it as just like a low carbohydrate diet. And I think that even resonates a little bit more with not just the average person, but the athlete, which is crazy to me because they'll be like, oh, I'm not on the keto diet, I'm just on a low carb diet, which that's what the keto diet is. But yeah, I still you'd think it would die, but I'm still getting questions on it.
So for the high performance athlete, we've learned as dietitians and performance enhancement experts, carbohydrates are the fuel source. So with this diet, you mentioned 5% of calories from carbohydrates, which mostly vegetables. Are there any concerns, whether it's performance related with this type of diet?
There's all types of concerns, Tavis. So I would say yes, 100%, because we know, as you just mentioned, carbohydrate fuels activity. And so especially high intense, really extreme activity, which a lot of like high level athletes are high school, college, and professional are doing. Without adequate carbohydrate, you are not going to excel in a workout, in a game like you should. I always like to put it like this. Might you survive the workout? Yes, you might. Are you going to thrive in the workout? Probably not. Because if you really take away your main source of fuel that especially fuels high intensity activity, there's no way you're going to be able to run that fast, jump that high, lift that heavy. It just isn't really physiologically possible. And so you have a challenge where performance obviously is going to be affected, probably negatively. Energy levels, carbohydrates, what helps keep your blood sugar stable. Energy levels are likely to be low. And then when we talk about recovery, we know we want athletes to recover so that their energy levels are back up for the next training session or bout of exercise. And so I really think it hinders training performance and recovery on all fronts. And energy levels. I mean, we all know your body can adapt to, the body's pretty good at adapting to what you give it. And that first few weeks, it might be really rough. And then people go, oh, I feel better. And I always tell athletes, okay, they're like, I feel fine. I'm like, right, but you might feel better if you did this. And I think carbohydrates could make you feel better, could make you run a little faster, could make you jump a little higher. And you're probably putting yourself at a deficit because you're not consuming them if you're on a diet like this.
Yeah, I don't believe I've ever seen a study in high performance. Now, I'm not talking about like someone does a light jog or they do a walking, competition. It's really those high performance anaerobic athletes. I don't think I've ever seen a study where there was a benefit, but are there any benefits to this type of diet for an athlete? Not an adult, just an athlete.
Yeah. I mean, if we're talking training performance recovery, I'm going to say no. If you're talking about an athlete that's in an off season that really, say you got an offensive lineman really wants to lose weight, I mean, I still just don't think I think you can do a modified carbohydrate diet if training is low, performance is low, or, they're not having to perform at that high level. for body fat loss, you might be able to do it there. But from a performance standpoint, and if anyone on here has worked in sports, there is no off season anymore. I mean, the off season is usually a more intense version of the season from a training and conditioning. So it's hard to say, oh, we're going to do that in the off season. I'm like, what off season? The 3 weeks you take off after, your actual sport season is over. And I will say this, I listened to this really interesting presentation by Louise Burke, like little goddess of sports nutrition. And what's really interesting is when athletes don't consume carbohydrate regularly, their glycolytic activity is basically kind of like decreased. So if they say they take it out for a good few weeks, then they insert carbohydrate back in. The research and some of the studies that they've done show that the body isn't as effective at using that carbohydrate because it's been removed from the diet for a period of time.
No, that's a great point. And, it's just one of these things. I remember I had a major league pitcher several years ago. We were working together and he called me up and he goes, I didn't tell you this, but he kind of went keto during the season. And he goes, I've noticed my fastball, which he wasn't an overpowering pitcher. He was more of a location pitcher, a lot of great off speed, great breaking ball. So he was able to just manage a game with just his low pitch location. But he's like, my fastball went from 93 to 88. And I was like, this is not a good idea. I said, in the off season, if you're trying to maybe get, like you said, a little bit of extra fat off, if you're not moving much and it's maybe a little bit of a light activity day, sure, we lower your carbs a little bit and you lower your calories, but don't go complete keto in the middle of a season. That makes absolutely no sense.
No sense whatsoever. I mean, especially, if you're talking about the average person going to the gym and walking on the treadmill, okay, it may not kill you as much. If you're trying to if winning a race requires you winning by 0.7 seconds, you should be eating carbohydrate or jumping 1 inch higher to rebound a ball, you should be eating carbohydrate. So a lot of people compare you could use this diet if you're in this situation. Well, I'm like, right, but you would never use it in this situation. So just because it might be applicable for an everyday person in a low performance, low training mode does not mean that it holds the same level of application for a very active, high-performing athlete.
Yep, that's a great point. Now, one of my concerns with this diet is I see a lot of people consuming enormous amounts of butter and cheese and high-fat meats, and they're thinking, all right, these are low-carb, great fat sources, or at least fat sources that are very high in fat. But I guess my concern was with all this saturated fat being consumed, and there's so much misinformation. It's not bad for you, or it's not going to harm your health. It will harm your health in different groups. Do we see a potential increased risk in things like cardiovascular disease? I know you and I were talking offline before we started recording about looking at certain markers, and I know we're not cardiologists, but ApoB is a critical marker that it elevates someone's risk of cardiovascular disease due to increased plaque buildup in the arteries. And everyone's saying, hey, saturated fat's the bad guy for that. That's going to cause high ApoB. But any feedback on that in regards to what you've seen?
Saturated fat, we know, is the number one increaser, right, of cholesterol levels, and high cholesterol buildup in the arteries, plaque buildup leading to heart disease. So, if someone does a keto diet for 2 weeks, all right, or 3 weeks, maybe not that big of a deal, but the long-term consumption of saturated fat, I think the research that we have right now shows that it will increase your blood levels of cholesterol, which puts you at risk for a variety of heart disease issues across the board. And, I think that there's a misconception that all athletes are just healthy. And right. I would argue that tons of athletes have the same tacky family history of heart disease and diabetes and all the things that the average person has. And so if you're looking at certain population groups of athletes, certain ethnicities of athletes that might be have a higher predisposition for heart disease, diabetes, et cetera, and you start going, okay, well, now I'm going to put you on a high saturated fat diet. You set yourself up to really, really maybe have some negative consequences later in life. You may not notice them as much when you're younger, active, exercising at an extreme level, but that could change because you're not going to be working out at that level probably forever. And so, yes, I do think it puts people at risk. I'm not saying it causes, but it does put people at risk for developing some of these more negative things in the heart health space.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I think it's important for, males 45 and older, females 50, 55 and older to start looking at extended tests like ApoB, but most importantly, like getting a coronary artery calcium score that can look at plaque formation in your arteries. Don't just rely on that total cholesterol number, because that number is fairly useless. And so, and I think I've seen some influencers, clinical lipidologists, kind of showing results like, hey, this is a patient that came to my office after 6 weeks or 2 months on a keto diet. They had some significant plaque buildup, within a short period of time, which usually takes years because they're consuming 200 grams of saturated fat. It's like, wow, that's kind of leads to my next question is, could we modify this? Someone who wants to do it, to where can they modify the diet, maybe change the fat sources that might be a little bit better for their health profile?
So I would say, yeah. So I did this one time with an athlete. I had an amateur athlete that did really extensive endurance racing, like 50-mile and 100-mile races. Please don't ever don't sign me up for one of those, Tavis, whatever you do. I love exercise, but no, thank you. And he wanted to lean out before one. And he was like, I really want to do the keto diet. Like he was off training before he started training for this. And I thought, all right. I mean, sometimes, which we can talk about at the end when it comes to recommendations, but sometimes athletes are very adamant, and you have to, I think, as a sports dietitian in our space, you have to go, okay, like I can make all the recommendations in the world, but if the athlete's not going to follow them, then what's really, okay, that nobody is winning there. So oftentimes we're making compromise or finding a compromise. So in this situation, I was like, fine, I'm going to push the protein up a little bit so it's not quite as keto-esque and high fat. And we did it. We did it with, nuts and nut butters and avocado and full fat Greek yogurt and all, lots of the, salmon. I was trying to get the healthiest fats as I could, very little actual real hardcore saturated fat. I was trying to do it with unsaturated fat to the best of my, obviously you're gonna pick up some when you're eating animal foods. And so, it helped him. He did lose weight in off season, then was able to get back into his training. So I think that there are certain scenarios where you can improve the quality of the protein and or the fat, that you're consuming. The other thing, and while this it makes it not the keto diet, but could also still play in the keto diet space, is if an athlete or an exerciser is just really focused on doing something like this, can you, number one, improve the fat choices? Number two, could you insert carbohydrate around the training and performance time periods, where possibly throughout other parts of the day, they could be a little lower in carbohydrate, but then around training, performance, and recovery, we're surrounding that with high quality, complex carbohydrates. And then obviously whatever's necessary, simple carbohydrate during and immediate post-exercise. I still don't think from a performance standpoint, you'll get what you really could get out of performance, but that is a way to modify, to try to succumb to, okay, you're following this type of diet, but trying to enhance performance and training.
Yeah,
so that's one way you could look at it as well.
Yeah, that's great. That's being reasonable with that person and saying, look, let's move some things around where we can still follow your goals and meet your goals, but do it in a way that's going to help you and not impair you. Awesome.
Exactly.
So let's shift a little bit. We talked about keto now. Let's move on to another very popular diet or name, intermittent fasting. This seems to be another popular approach or trend these days. And let's kind of define that. What is the definition of an intermittent fasting type diet for our listeners?
So intermittent fasting is really what it is, right? It's fasting and you're eating in certain intervals. So if you look at the real version of intermittent fasting, there's really three types of it. So one of them is what I would call the most common, which is where you fast for about 16 hours and you eat for 8 hours. Typically, you'll see people eating in the 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. window. You might see 10 to 6 or 12 to 8, but somewhere right in there. Then they're fasting the whole rest of the time. Another version, a little bit less popular, highly not recommended in my book, would be eating regular for 5 days a week and then only eating 500 to 600 calories for 2 days a week. And then another one is one day a week, you just totally fast for 24 hours. those are a lot harder, I think, to do. I would say most people, if I say intermittent fasting, they immediately think of the 16-8, which is fasting for 16 hours. And I would tell you that this is probably the most popular diet that I still hear about. So I do a lot of public speaking at events, athletes, coaches, trainers, everyday people. And I made a joke recently that at the end of every presentation, I don't care what the topic is, I should just have a slide on intermittent fasting because someone's going to ask me about it. And It's that popular. And it has stayed popular for quite a period of time. So you're really just, the diet does not go, oh, you have to take this out. You have to take that out. You can only eat this much carb, only this. No. There's no real regulation to that, which is, I think, why people like it. I actually think people like diets, people and athletes that are stricter in nature because it takes out the thinking component. So great. I eat from 11 to 8 and I don't have to worry about what I'm eating. I just eat. Like that's a pretty yes, no. And I think that taking the thinking out is why many people actually like that versus a balanced type diet perspective.
That's a great point. Yeah, I remember when it first came out years ago, and I was like, let me try fasting. Let's see what this is all about. And the 16-8 was not very difficult. Like I can stop eating at 8 o'clock the night before and wait till lunch. Pretty easy. I was like, let me try this 24-hour thing. A buddy of mine was doing it. And I was like, let me see if I can go a whole day without eating. And it was really difficult. I got to about 22 hours and I was incredibly miserable. Like, I don't think I can wait 2 more hours. And I just didn't allow myself to adapt. I went from the 16-hour to like, let's wait another 8. But yeah, it can be done. And like you said, it's just not really, it's probably not realistic for some people to do that. I love breakfast too much to even fast. Like,
that's like my favorite meal of the day.
Yeah, it's like I wake up going, I can't wait to figure out what I'm eating today. I don't know why. It's just love eating breakfast. Me too. All right. So let's kind of talk about a little bit more. You talked about the different approaches, but for athletes, especially young athletes, I've gotten some questions at high school programs. Are there any concerns about restricting calories at particular times for the athlete?
I'm going to say yes, and then yes again. So let's talk high school. So the youth athlete first. One of the biggest problems is youth athletes do this thing called school, and they have to go to it in the morning. And most of them are there before 8 a.m. Many of them also have morning practices. And we know that when you eat carbohydrate and protein together, that helps stabilize your blood sugar, which is going to stabilize your energy levels, stabilize your mental acuity, ultimately helping you feel better and perform better, be that physically or mentally throughout the day. So anytime we're talking about restricting calories in the morning for an athlete, I think that that's negative because so many of them, they have to go to school or they're going to practice. And then they're like, what about in the summer? Well, most of them are going to morning practices in the summer. And so number one problem, just from a fueling standpoint. Number two is I think a lot of people don't realize when you only eat 8 hours in a day, you really limit your ability to consume all of the recommended nutrients that we want you to get. How you are getting all of your protein, all your grain servings, 5 servings of fruit, at least 5 servings of fruits and vegetables, 3 servings of dairy, all these things. Like, how are you fitting all of that into your 8 hours? And for high school athletes specifically, they're in school and there are heavy stipulations for many athletes about when they can eat and when they cannot. So you're talking about an athlete that might be eating lunch, which they don't get to choose their lunchtime. It's dictated by their schedule. And then rolling into a practice at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and maybe they've consumed 1 meal and now they're going to go to practice and probably leave and go to a club practice or another sport practice. Bad. And it just goes against everything I know about performance nutrition, which says fuel your body often, put protein in your body at regular intervals. To me, and we can talk about protein research all day, but to me, it's totally counter to protein research. We're basically saying, try to get protein in as often as you can in your waking hours, not excessive amounts, but adequate amounts. And intermittent fasting to me is like the polar opposite of that recommendation.
Yeah, it seems a lot of these kids would be, if they did this, they'd come home ravenous. And most of them are already coming home ravenous because they're not even eating breakfast. So as you mentioned, this is not a good idea for the young athlete, especially growing. They're still growing. They're not reached full growth spurts all the way until 18, 19 years of age. And it could impair
Now,
and the whole thing is too, you don't know when an athlete is growing. You don't know when their body is making changes. And so if you restrict calories, energy, nutrients at certain time frames, like you, to your point, could be restricting necessary nutrients and energy for growth and development because you can't see that physically happening with your eyes. Like I have just a small kid, my niece and nephew are like 7 and 4. And my mom's like, oh my gosh, my nephew, he's 4, has been just eating nonstop. I'm like, well, he's probably about to grow because a lot of times kids eat their way into growing. We know that. So yeah, huge red flags for young athletes.
My 12-year-old is probably going to, probably more information we need to talk about here, but she's 5'8" at 12. She's very tall, plays volleyball, and she called me today, and she's like, "Dad, I'm a lady," and we all know what that means. Things have started in her life. So I'm thinking, oh, this is not a good thing for me, but probably great for you as being grown up. But it just means she's going to get hungry too. Her appetite's going to change. She's been growing like crazy, and you mentioned that, so it made me think of that. Let's look at a little bit when we look at this, type of diet. Is there a place where, let's say an athlete gets injured, we hope that never happens, and they can't do any training besides maybe some light rehab? Would this be something where you would say, still, you're too young, don't do it, or maybe they just skip breakfast? Thoughts on that process? Because I know that's a question we might get is, what if my son or daughter is not active? Mm-hmm. Is this a good approach?
I mean, that's like saying I have a car, but I just don't put gas in it. So I'm not going to go anywhere today.
Right, exactly.
I am like not a fan of intermittent fasting for anybody active. So I get asked about it all the time, and people go, "Oh, there's research that supports it." So let's do a little deep dive real fast on the research. Most all of the research is done on people that are obese or overweight. They typically all have diabetes or are pre-diabetic. So the research done on those people cannot be compared to a young active athlete. That's not the same population group. The other thing that I will say is, while the research shows that intermittent fasting will work for managing hunger and losing weight, losing body fat, all the things, if you keep reading in the research, you will also find that a proper caloric diet, balanced meal does the exact same thing. And typically the differences are not significantly, statistically significant.
Right.
And so, yes, intermittent fasting works, but so does a very balanced diet. And so when I look at athletes, whether they're injured, they're in off season or whatnot, okay, maybe you're not, I always liken the body to your car in regards to, if you drive your car around a lot, you typically have to stop and put more gas in it because the car is moving a lot. Okay, if I have a car, say I go to work at 8 a.m. and I don't leave till 5 or whatever, the car still moves. It's just not moving quite as much. Well, that doesn't mean I don't put gas in it. It just may not need as much gas as the car that's driving, the little salesperson that's driving around all day. Very similar to the body. So just because it's not moving doesn't be like, oh, I can just not eat. You might need to adapt the quantity that you're eating. But I think the real goal becomes eating more often so that you're not starving at the next meal or snack, and that you're able to make more appropriate quality choices. Because we all know when people feel starving, they typically eat more than what they should. And no one craves broccoli when they're starving for whatever reason. They want chips and salsa or whatever it is. And so I've never seen someone that's like, where's the snap peas and the hummus? They're like, I need chips and queso. And so I think when you do that, you set an athlete, a young person, whoever, up to potentially not make as good of choices. Whereas if I was just feeding you often throughout the day, smaller, more frequent meals, balanced with high fiber, carbohydrates, and protein, you would feel better. You would be providing your body with more nutrients, have more energy, and then not be as hungry at the next meal or snack, which should promote proper portion sizes and probably better quality consumption. So I just can't look at intermittent fasting and tell most people this is a good idea. I'll have someone go, what works for me? Well, guess what? Nutrition is very individualized, and there are weird things that work some for people, but we have to look as a sports dietitian or as an athletic trainer, a strength coach, whoever is talking to an athlete, we have to look at what does this mean for the global population when we're making, recommendations to athletes as a group, to athletes as a team. And there are scenarios where specific things for one athlete might work, but that doesn't mean it should be applied to a group.
Yeah. I think the one area where this is beneficial, and it's a completely different area than sports, is longevity. We've seen some research on the time restricted feeding and skipping meals and keeping blood sugar balanced could lead to maybe a longer life. we did a podcast with Dr. Jake May on that. But again, for athletes and performance longevity and athletes, that's a whole different topic.
Well, and Tavis, like, let's make note too, whether you're in high school, middle school, high school, college, or professional sports, or the average person going to the gym, I would say that a solid probably 70% of those athletes have some type of training in the morning. They may not have practice in the morning, but they might have lifting, or they might have conditioning or something like that. And it, to me, is an oxymoron to go to a practice and not eat until lunch. That is like, just denies everything that we know about adequate pre and post workout nutrition. And so I'm like, just because you make it through a workout doesn't mean that that's a good idea. And so one of my challenges is for really active people or exercisers that do that type of like not eating in the morning, I'm like, you're ultimately hindering your body's ability to recover, to start the, muscle protein synthesis, resynthesis after a workout. And so that's one of my other things is so many of these athletes are training in the morning and we're really hindering the ability to eat before for energy and to eat after for recovery, which to me makes it a huge red flag and no for any type of exerciser or athlete.
I love it. Yeah. I used to talk to kids and be like, if you're going to work out first thing in the morning at 6 or 7 and lift and not eat until lunch, don't lift.
Don't lift. Yeah. Just don't.
Because you're just going to break down more muscle. And they're like, what do you mean? So that's a whole different topic. All right.
Oh my gosh.
So one thing I was thinking, oh, we should have talked about bodybuilding diets. That's but that's a whole different discussion because that's another thing young athletes would go, I want to eat like a bodybuilder. I'm like, well, do you want to look like a bodybuilder or an athlete? Or do you want to perform like an athlete? And I'm like,
thank you.
You can't eat bodybuilding diet and perform like an athlete. The two don't work together.
I'm telling you, it's this thing that someone looks a certain way, so they must be able to perform a certain way. And I'm going to argue that is real false.
Absolutely.
Real false.
Right.
Telling you, there's no Victoria's Secret model that could go run 3 hours or go run 3 miles after she's walked a runway. I'm telling you, not possible. She's not making it down the 3 mile marker, girl. Just let
you mean they can't run 3 miles in those heels? Come on.
Right? I'm like, oh my gosh. I don't know why this is so hard for athletes to get. I'm like, oh my gosh.
All right. This next diet label, it's one I just don't like the name of it, but some people love it. And it's being promoted a lot. It's called the plant-based diet. Now, when I think of that, I'm like, are people actually eating plants? And it's just, to me, it's just the same. So my first question around plant-based diets, is this the same as just vegetarian or vegan, or what makes a diet plant-based?
This is a good question, Tavis. This is a good question. So I would typically say most people think a plant-based base is vegetarian or vegan. So most people on here would know this, but vegan, no animal products whatsoever at all. No, probably not even honey for many people because it's made from bees. Okay. Vegetarian, we have a little bit of, flexibility here because some really strict vegetarians eat no dairy, no eggs. You might have, a lacto-ovo vegetarian that will eat dairy and eggs, or you might have one that eats eggs, no dairy, or vice versa. And so you can play around with what a vegetarian diet looks like. Some of them have the opportunity to get in more high quality protein, obviously, if we're talking about dairy, including dairy and eggs. Plant-based, I think, still really, is built around the vegetarian and vegan diets for most people. And I don't think eating plants, I mean, clearly we're dietitians, like we think you should eat plants. But my challenge is many people, athletes specifically, that eat like quote unquote plant-based, and they're not really eating that many fruits and vegetables. I like to call it, they're not a vegetarian, they're a carbotarian. And my theory is always, if you're going to be a lazy vegan or a lazy vegetarian, don't do it, because you're not going to get in the nutrients. You're not going to get in the protein that you need. And because it does take, while I'm not saying it's impossible for the many athletes that have done both, you have to be very strategic about your nutrient and your protein intake. And you have to be very diligent about it. And that many times athletes aren't willing to commit to that, which makes a solely plant-based diet less optimal for them.
I guess the word plant-based is just a convenient or lazy way to say vegetarian or vegan. And we got away from that.
So.
You don't hear that. It's like, I'm jelly. I'm like, oh no, don't use that word. It's jealous. Jelly and jealous don't even make sense. All right.
Right.
So when we look at athletes, let's just kind of shift to that point and really the athletic performance. Do you see more athletes shifting towards, a vegetarian or vegan or plant-based or just a meatless based diet?
In the last few years, I would say we've definitely seen more of a shift, I think, due to the popularity of it in media. I also think, like I said at the beginning, people are really well informed with misinformation, and they're getting information about foods like beef, light dairy, light eggs, that quote unquote, they're not good for you. And much of the quote unquote studies that are coming out, they're not peer reviewed. You know what I mean? These people are not quoting like peer reviewed studies. I mean, people will tell me all kinds of stuff about dairy. And I'm like, that's false. Like, have you read any meta-analysis? Like, what's happening? And they believe false information. So I feel like the media and the whole world of sustainability, which is positive, right? This is a positive thing. We do want to become more sustainable. But I got news for you. Your car that you're driving is doing a lot worse things for the environment than cows are. You know what I mean? But that's not what they're hearing. And so people, for whatever reason, are saying, okay, well, this is ruining the environment, so I'm not going to eat animals, or I'm not going to eat animal foods, or it's gonna, whatever, cause heart disease, so I'm not going to do that. When the truth is, we need athletes to consume high quality protein, and the majority of high quality protein options, high quality meaning contains all the essential amino acids, are going to be those animal foods: beef, poultry, pork, fish, dairy, eggs, etc. There are some high quality proteins that are plant-based foods like quinoa, like soy foods, amaranth, chia seeds, whatever, and all the things, hemp seeds. But for the most part, the problem becomes, I think, for a lot of athletes, is not consuming high quality protein. So when I get asked about this type of diet, like, is it better? Is it good? Like, do you really have to eat plant-based, or could you eat like a plant-focused diet? That's the word I like, plant-focused. Or the concept of like the flexitarian, where you're eating a lot of plants, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, etc., but you are flexing in high quality protein on a regular basis so that you're providing your body with what it needs from an athlete standpoint to build and rebuild muscle.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I remember I did a vegetarian probably 15 years ago. I was like, I'm going to do a vegetarian experiment. It was when I was kind of like giving things up for Lent. I'm like, I'm going to give something up. I was like, I'm going to do vegetarian for 40 days. Well, I actually went 90. It was fine. And then one day I was like, I need a steak. I was like, I just really was needing steak. But then I tried a vegan experiment. I was like, all right, 30 days. I'm going to give myself 30 days. Let's see if I can do this. And then I was 22 days in. I came home and I smelled like turkey sausage that was being cooked. And all of a sudden I was like, I can't do this anymore. That was really hard. That was extremely difficult. But let's talk about potential benefits. Are there any, are there some benefits, for those that are going to do this? Like you said, they want to be vegan or vegetarian. Are there any benefits for that type of approach for athletes?
Definitely. If an athlete starts consuming more fruits, vegetables, whole grains, we're going to increase nutrient and fiber consumption, which is necessary for athletes, necessary for the everyday person. So obviously, if you're making a swap and swapping out some of your more processed foods and whatnot for more whole plant style foods, then you're going to get fiber, you're going to get nutrients, etc. Obviously, it's so funny. I've had, professional athletes, dear God, help me. And, they're like, well, I did vegan and like, I feel so much better. And I'm like, you went from Whataburger to vegan. Anybody would feel better. Like anybody would feel better. What are you doing? And so I'm like, it's amazing what those fruits and vegetables will make you feel like. And so, a lot of times it's all relative. If you take an athlete that hasn't been eating well, not eating all of the nutrients, and then they start eating something that is very nutrient rich, as we know, like they are going to feel better. But I always just caution them, like, what might you be missing? And we all know, like any of these diets that we're talking about, anytime you take out a whole food group, you are often taking out the major nutrients that food group provides. And if you are not replacing those nutrients with others, it's likely that you could set yourself up for micronutrient deficiency over time. And with animal foods, that's where we get a lot of all of our, like heme iron, our vitamin B12, lots of vitamin, our vitamin D, like these types of foods. We don't find as much of that in plant-based foods. So I'm like, well, if you're going to take it out, you have to find a way to get it back in. How are you going to do that? And I think that sometimes that is where the challenge comes in. So while there's benefit from a nutrient consumption standpoint. There's also deficit because of a lack of nutrient consumption standpoint.
Makes sense. Yep. Now, we talked a little bit about some of the benefits. For those that are vegan, do you see it being challenging to hit their protein goals?
I do, but you have to be very strategic about it, obviously, especially if you're a high performing athlete and, you're needing, 1.5 to 2 grams of protein per kilogram body weight. I mean, that's a decent amount of protein. And you have to remember that in the world of plant-based protein, a few things. Number one, that plant-based protein isn't quite as bioavailable as animal-based protein. So you actually probably need a little bit more protein than what you would if you are eating a solely plant-based protein diet. The second thing is that one of the biggest quote unquote challenges with plant-based protein foods is that they're not just protein. Like if I eat chicken, pretty much eating protein, right? Maybe a little bit of fat, whatever. If I eat peanut butter, I'm eating a decent amount of fat and some protein. If I eat quinoa, I'm eating a lot of carbs and some protein. If I eat beans, I'm eating, carbs and protein. And so, for example, let's say I ate three ounces of lean beef. It's going to give me around 25-ish grams of protein for about 175-ish calories. Well, for me to get that same 25 grams of protein, you have to eat like 3 cups or over 3 cups of quinoa. Well, that's over 600 calories. Like I'm a peanut butter girl. Anyone who knows me knows that. But to get that much protein, you have to eat 6.5 tablespoons of peanut butter. That's over 600 calories. So one of the challenges I see more so probably with female athletes that may not have as big of a caloric budget as larger male athletes is that you have to be really strategic because you could really easily start taking in a lot more calories trying to meet your protein goals.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right. So as we kind of wrap up, we're not finished yet. We have one more topic and kind of closing out on diets. We could probably talk about 10 more diets, which would take an hour or two, but let's close out with carnivore. This is one I've seen gaining so much popularity, on different influencers in the world of social media channels or I don't want to name certain names, but some people have gotten a lot of different, millions of followers because of their ancestral approach. But let's talk about what this diet is. Can you explain a little bit about what's involved when you follow a carnivore type diet?
Yeah, pretty simple. The carnivore diet basically means you eat protein and animal foods, and that's it. So you eat, beef, you can eat fish, you can eat eggs, certain dairies. It really doesn't want you to eat the dairy that has carbohydrates. So it's really talking more about consuming like cheese, your lower lactose cheeses and whatnot. They don't really want, and butter, of course, they say that you can have, but it primarily really, really, really is all meat. So it takes out what's interesting, like all fruit, all vegetables, all grains. And so it's really protein and meat. And obviously there's going to be fat in there. And so, that's basically like what you eat. So, kudos, you're getting your protein intake in, but there are a lot of challenges associated with only eating protein.
That's interesting. Yeah. Look, I would love to just eat meat and fish and chicken. Mostly if I can just eat steak all day, I would do that. But I have a little concerns about just eating certain foods, especially super high in fat. And that's all I'm eating. But I don't know, we'll talk about the research of that in a second. Now, I feel this would pose some risk, obviously, for the athletes. We talked about the risk for keto earlier. This would almost seem like this is worse than keto. So what are your biggest concerns with this type of diet for an athlete?
So obviously energy levels, because if you're not eating carbohydrate, how are you fueling any form of activity or high intensity activity? So I think energy levels and performance levels will be significantly impaired. And, some athletes, if you're a really good athlete, you might be able to maybe maintain a level of where you are, but typically, I think high fat diets and activity, especially endurance activity, would show you that they just can't get better. Like they can't get faster. They can't. It's like physically impossible. So obviously energy, definitely lack of performance. And then lack of nutrients, because when you take out fruits, vegetables, whole grains, you are taking out fiber and lots of other micronutrients that are found in plant foods. Like we were talking about a minute ago, if you take out the animal foods, okay, now you're missing some there, which if the moral of the story is probably don't take out whole food groups. But, anytime you take out a whole food group, you are likely going to be missing the major nutrients that food group provides. Take out beef, you're missing a lot of iron and B12. Take out dairy, you're missing a lot of calcium and vitamin D. Take out grains and vegetables. Where is your fiber, which we know is helpful for heart and gut health? So, I just could not get behind this, because it's just like, to me, if you're trying to perform at the highest level, why wouldn't you put the things in your body that help you perform at the highest level?
Yeah, I agree. And I guess by kind of way, let's play the opposite. We talked about these risks, but is there anything positive that you think that could come from this type of diet, whether it's for an athlete or anyone in general?
Probably typically there would be weight loss associated, honestly. If you've ever eaten a high protein, high fat diet, you get full really fast because protein and fat slow down digestion. So they help you get full faster, stay full longer. So while lots of people brag on these diets because they don't have to count calories or whatnot, typically it's because I think they're just eating foods that by default make them feel full. So they might necessarily eat less because they're not as hungry. So from a weight loss standpoint, anytime you burn through your glycogen or your stored carbohydrate stores, you're going to lose the water that's associated with that. And, Tavis, a lot of times with this is kind of similar to what I would say intermittent fasting people, am I talking to someone who's got uncontrolled type 2 diabetes, blood sugar through the roof, high cholesterol, significantly overweight, maybe he's going to walk the block 2 times a week? I'm like, well, okay, maybe intermittent fasting or whatever diet's not so bad for you, right? But for an athlete, no way. But in this situation, my biggest concern is we are taking out so many nutrients, taking out at least the keto diet lets you eat vegetables. In this situation, right? No vegetables, no fruit, no grains, which means all the people, no beans, no lentils, no legumes. So it just, no nuts. Because obviously to me, nuts aren't really one of the things that they promote on this. So I just think you're missing out on so many valuable nutrients that it would be difficult for me to find a real positive to it.
Yeah, no, I see some of these influencers that have a lot of followers and trying to mimic what they do. And they're putting butter, like sticks of butter on steaks. They're eating, 7, 8, 9, 10 eggs at a time with just eggs. And that's it. I'm like, wow, it's going to be interesting to see if there's any long-term studies that look at this. And that's kind of my question. Have you seen any research on this in athletes yet?
I don't think there's actually any research period at all, actually. So
I don't think
I've done some looking, and if you ever, I'm going to give you all a tip. If you're not a real PubMed, go find the research. Look at Healthline. I used to write for them. They medically review. I Google everything like this, Tavis. Healthline carnivore diet. Healthline.
Right.
They cite their research in there, so it'll naturally pull the right research. And I specifically looked to see through their stuff. And basically, the only quote unquote study that's ever been done is the guy the quote unquote doctor that created this diet. He once did we'll call it a quote unquote study by surveying people, and there was no he did the study, no third party testing, nobody double checking, peer review, double blind, none of that action. It was a study based on testimonies. And we all know that is not actual legit science. And so to my knowledge, there's actually no studies period on it.
Got it. No, it's interesting. I'm just kind of looking online to see while you're chatting to see if there's anything in regards to that. And it looks like Harvard did something. They did a survey. They surveyed people.
A survey. Yeah, it's a survey.
Yeah, it was a survey. But I think they're going to, obviously there's been a lot of studies on low carb. There's a lot of keto studies, but nothing on this yet. And I might have to look at clinicaltrials.gov and see if there's anything underway, because I'm sure scientists now are like, all right, it's time to start putting some people in, but can they get enough people to adhere to that type of diet for 6 months? All right. So my last question on this topic, and I'm assuming I already kind of know what I think you're going to say, but concerns for high school, college athletes are trying to meet their calorie demand, just eating meat, right? That's going to be a lot of challenges. You mentioned performance enhancement is probably going to drop, and other outcomes too.
All the things, yes. We're going to have probably deficits in training, performance, recovery, low energy levels, low nutrient intake. And like we were talking about earlier with young athletes, even into college, you require nutrients for growth and development. I like to liken like vitamins and minerals and antioxidants to like the behind the scenes crew at like a concert or a sporting event. Like you don't always see them, but if they weren't there, bad things would happen. And so like, if you think about it, the vitamins, minerals, antioxidants that we get from all of these different food groups are kind of the behind the scenes crew in your body, helping with recovery, helping with growth and development, helping with muscle and protein synthesis, metabolism. You take those guys away, especially for a period of time, bad things can happen. And so, and the other thing that I would say, Tavis, when it comes to high school and college athletes, one of the hardest things to do in the world is get them like food that has to be hot and cold, which are animal foods. Like that's one of the hardest challenges with kids at school, kids in college. I mean, sometimes we have to rely more on like brown bag, shelf stable type things due to their schedule. So I don't know how all these athletes would be eating eggs and beef all day when those have to typically be hot or cold, and kids sometimes are at school and practice for like 10 hours in a day.
Yeah. All right. Last question, and we're going to get into something fun. Any diets or topics that we didn't discuss today that you feel is important to address?
I think we've hit most of the high points of them. And, I would just tell any athlete, any exerciser, and or anyone that works with those types of people, like, do diets produce results? Yes, many of them do. But just because a diet produces a result doesn't mean it's good for you, and doesn't mean there's also going to be a negative consequence to it. And so I think when we evaluate these for athletes, we have to look at the bigger picture, the long-term picture. And ultimately, for especially an athlete, if we are talking about the goal being enhancing training performance and recovery and doing everything that we can for the health of the athlete, then I think we're doing a disservice if we're allowing them to participate in some of these diets, at least without proper education and knowledge of them knowing what the consequences, pros and cons are, so that if they make that decision, they're making it from a very informed and educated space. Because many of them, I really do think they just follow a trend and they're not thinking about the negative consequences. And I think as professionals, it's our job. Like a lot of times I'll lay out, here's your pro, here's your con, but this is what could happen. And then you have to allow them to make the decision, hoping that they will go with what's best for their body.
Awesome. Amy, this was fantastic. Just a great discussion. Went by really fast. We did it in a little bit under an hour, but we're not done. We're going to change the topic. We're going to go to our curveball round. I'm going to ask you three things, nothing related to today. All right, my first question is the staple. I always ask this question because I'm a music junkie. If I can just retire and go to concerts around the world, that's all I would love to do. So if you could be the lead singer of any music group, band today, in the past, who would that be?
Oh, Travis, I'm your worst nightmare. I know nothing. I don't even know group names. Let me tell you how I develop song names. I pick the most commonly used phrase in the song, and that's what I call it. I have no idea. You know what? I wouldn't be here's your curveball answer. I wouldn't be the lead singer. I would want to be a backup dancer. Totally. My love for dance is so high. I would want to be the backup dancer. So there's your curveball answer.
You're the first person to not answer that question. My advice is stop working so much and go enjoy some music.
I would want to be like be able to dance like Jennifer Lopez and be like a background dancer. That would be, I love dancing so much. It would be, that's a hobby I need to take back up. But so I'd be the background dancer. Mm-hmm.
What would old Amy, I don't want to call you old, but Amy today, go back and tell young Amy one thing? If there's one thing you could go back and tell your young self, what would that be?
Well, I would personally tell myself to take some business classes. Like, I'm a big believer, you're a product of your experiences. Like, everything happens for a reason, and you can use good things and bad things to your advantage. But the one thing that I will tell myself is I never wanted to challenge myself and take a business course because my brain necessarily wasn't wired like that. And I really think that whether you own your own business one day or just to understand the nature of everything that goes on in the world, I would have made myself take at least one business entrepreneurial type class to become more savvy in the space and have to do less figuring it out later.
Yeah, I love that answer because I hated that kind of stuff. When I saw economics, I'm like, I had to take an economics test. I'm like, oh man, it's just like, I don't know. I don't care about that stuff. And now I'm like, I would do exactly that. I want an MBA. I want to learn everything about the business because we had to figure it out ourselves. All right. Last question. What's the biggest regret that you have in your life? Tough question. I've never asked anyone this, and this could be professionally related. It doesn't have to be anything, really secretive or anything, but is there like one regret you could go, man, I wish I could go back and fix that?
Biggest regret. Man, that's a hard one. I'm trying to think
And if it's too hard, then I might be like, all right, I can come up with something else I have as a fourth question.
I'm trying to think. What's yours? Do you have one?
Yeah, but it's probably too personal to discuss here.
Okay.
Yeah.
I haven't. No, it's all good. I'm trying to think because, like I said, I'm a real big believer that things happen for a reason. And sometimes no's are your best, no's in your face end up being allowing opportunities for your best yes later. And I really have tried to learn. I come from a family that's tried to teach me that, and faith that teaches me, just because something goes the way you want it to doesn't mean that's not the way it's supposed to go. I don't know, Debs. I might have to go to the next question. I can't think of like a major, oh my gosh, my life would have been totally different if I did fill in the blank.
So if you could invent one thing that would truly change the landscape of, let's just say, health, what would that be?
Landscape of health, huh? Wow, these are difficult questions. I thought it was just going to be in general, and I did have an answer for you there. But,
no more questions after this. That's it.
Okay, health. Gosh, I don't.
Let's say
this. I think one of the biggest challenges that we have in our world is just like a general lack of discipline. I think that's the problem. And we have more diet books, diets, everything. And people are not getting leaner, healthier, and fitter, yet they have more information than they've ever had. So There's some disconnect there. I don't know that I know the answer, but I think I know the problem. I think, is a lot of discipline issues. But I don't exactly know how you solve that. I would have to think through how could I learn to create and or fix discipline issues, because I think that could help a lot of people if they just weren't doing everything because they felt or did not feel like doing it.
I think we'll end here. I think I have an easy question and it'll be fun.
Oh my gosh, see if I have an answer.
3 foods you just could not live. If you could only live with the 3 foods for the rest of your life, what would those 3 foods or meals be?
Oatmeal, peanut butter, and cheese.
Okay. Wow.
Oatmeal, peanut butter together.
We'll end with oatmeal, peanut butter, and cheese. So you're going to have to make an oatmeal, peanut butter, cheese bar.
Yeah, cheese might be weird on that. But I always tell people, if I ever ended up stranded on an island, someone just send me peanut butter. I will survive.
Well, Amy, thank you so much. This was fantastic. Great information. I know our listeners
enjoyed this.
Thank you for having me. Absolutely. We're going to have you back at some point in the future and come up with a different topic that we can share.
100%. Yes. No, I love being here. It's great to talk about this and great for all of us to focus in and, look at the reality of sports nutrition for athletes. We have to deal with it. And so I think you really have to come up with solutions that, are right for the athlete, but then that the athlete will follow as well.
Absolutely. Amy, thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.
Well, that's it for today's show. Thanks for listening to the All Me podcast from the Taylor Hooten Foundation, a nonprofit organization leading a national campaign to enlighten people to the truths about appearance and performance-enhancing substances and inspiring people to live and compete without the use of these substances. Please be sure to subscribe to our podcast and tune in to our next episode.